Good afternoon. My name is Reverend Dean Nelson, and it's a pleasure to see so many friends gathered here. We also want to welcome those of you who may be watching via Facebook Live as well as live stream. I serve as the Director of Outreach for the Human Coalition, but important for us today, I also serve as a Senior Fellow for the Family Research Council as well as Watchman on the Wall. I'm also pleased to tell you that I serve also as the Chairman of the Board for the Frederick Douglass Foundation and the Douglass Leadership Institute. It's Black History Month, and we're excited about the Family Research Council taking this opportunity to host this important event. Today's event and lecture is actually titled Repairers of the Breach, and we're blessed to have with us someone who has been involved in this work for several decades throughout America, and we'll introduce him in just a few moments. Through my work with the Douglass Leadership Institute, we actually, over the last year, have hosted a number of programs around the country focused on strengthening the Black family, criminal justice reform, and economic opportunity. We've actually surveyed thousands of African American churchgoers, and we've asked them about some of the issues that are important to them. The issues that consistently come up are issues of poverty, issues of justice, issues of the family, and education. The person that I'm going to introduce to you in the next few moments, Mr. Bob Woodson, has served for a long time answering some of these questions to critics as well as to supporters. The Douglass Leadership Institute, over the next several months, will be hosting a series of lectures and events that will address some of these important issues. Bob Woodson is the founder and president of what is now called the Woodson Center, often referred to as the godfather of the movement to empower neighborhood-based organizations. Bob's social activism dates back to the 1960s. Back then, Bob was a young civil rights activist, and he developed and coordinated national and local community development programs. During the 1970s, he directed the National Urban League's Administration for Justice Division. Later, he served as a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. For more than 4 decades, he has promoted the principles of self-help, neighborhood empowerment, and the importance of institutions of civil society. Dedicating his life to helping low-income people address the problems in their communities, in 1981, Woodson founded the Center for Neighborhood Enterprises, known as the National Center for Faith-Based Organizations. I want to say that he has profoundly influenced the way people think about the strengths of low-income people. For more than just a philosophy, he has promoted measurable results and living examples that actually provide proof of his principles. Woodson is the only person ever to have received both the liberal and conservative world's most prestigious awards, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Genius Fellowship and the Harry Bradley Foundation Prize, as well as the Presidential Citizen Medal. I'm happy to introduce my good friend and colleague, Bob Woodson, and as he comes, please give him a strong round of applause.
Thanks, Dean, and I'm so pleased to have a chance to address you. Some of my friends, when I received the MacArthur Award, they said I'm the only non-communist ever to get it. So I think I just sneaked in under the wire. There is a prayer that I utter each time that I speak and I commend to you. That is, Lord, give me the strength to tell and pursue the truth, especially when it's inconvenient to me. Dr. King said that the highest form of maturity is the ability to be self-critical. Because if you want to go someplace you haven't been, it's important to do something you haven't done. Or as my grassroots philosophers say, if you keep doing what you do, you keep getting what you got. And so with that in mind, I would like to just tell you part of my journey in exploring this issue has to do with my own personal biography, having raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a blue-collar neighborhood. We didn't have any professors living in our neighborhoods. They were all people who worked in factories and all, but 93% of the households had a man and a woman raising children. And my dad died when I was 9, and leaving 5 children for my mother to raise who had a 5th grade education. So it meant I had to rely on a circle of friends as an extension of my family. As much as so I understand why kids join gangs. It isn't the organization that we object to. It's the criminal behavior of the organization. So I dropped out of high school at 17 when my friends who were a year older graduated, which meant that I was unaffiliated, and you do not live in urban communities unaffiliated. But I went into the Air Force, where I came to myself and matured and finished and got my GED and came out of the Air Force and my form of affirmative action was to go to school all year, including the summers, and drive 60 miles to my job. And so it is with that background in mind, but then I became active in the civil rights movement, but I realized early on that many of those who suffered and sacrificed most in the struggle for civil rights did not benefit from the change. That immediately the civil rights movement, unfortunately, after we had the great victories in voting rights, it morphed into a race grievance industry. Now, the black community is often a moral barometer of the social and health of the nation. And we seem to have associated the black community with pathology. The assumption is that the problems that we're witnessing today, 70% of the families that are being raised in inner cities that are creating the problems, have always existed. Prior to the 1960s, there was never a correlation between aberrant behavior and racism and poverty. There was never there. Middle class did not mean how much money you made. Middle class was a set of values. The barber in my neighborhood was middle class. He came in a suit. He didn't miss Sunday school for 30 years because he wore that pin on his lapel. But he was an upstanding citizen. And so the myth is that racism and poverty are the cause of the problem. If that were the case, then between 1930 and 1940, when we had the Depression, there was a 25% unemployment rate, negative GNP. The unemployment rate in the black community was more like 40%. One would assume with these combination of circumstances that the community would go to hell in a handbasket. But the black community had a higher marriage formation rate than did the white community. We had social and economic and religious structures that insulated us from pathology. Grandparents were not afraid of their grandchildren during that period of time. The longest sustained reduction in poverty occurred between 1940 and 1960. And so, but something happened. In 1962, 85% of all black families had a man and a woman raising children. But something happened in the 60s to change all that. The question is, how do we go from 1962, with 85% of black families having a man and a woman raising children, to a decline at what happened? How did this cliff? We fell off the cliff to the point where only 30% of children today are being raised in two-parent households. What happened? Well, I'll explain to you what happened. If you can read about it in Fred Siegel's book, The Future Once Happened Here, Manhattan Institute. what happened was, following the watch riots, some social scientists, Cloward Piven at Columbia University School of Social Work, they concluded on the left that one of the ways that we can emphasize the contradictions of capitalism and one of the ways that we can begin to address poverty is through income redistribution. And so therefore, one of the ways of accomplishing that is just flood the system, the welfare system, with recipients. But there were social restrictions or a stigma associated with being on relief. But it's just changing. And so what they said, it is important to disconnect work from income and make that a public policy. And what will happen then is that families will disintegrate, dropout rates will occur, drug addiction will increase, and therefore we will poor. So welfare went from social insurance to a welfare right to reparations. And there was a combination of groups that supported that, and just passing a policy was insufficient to accomplish this. There had to be some help from institutions of government. You had the Lindsay administration, and then you had the poverty programs in Washington. They opened special offices in New York and other major cities to actively recruit people on welfare. The women's movement, the Black Power movement, attacked the nuclear family as being Western European and racist. To hold the black community to a two-parent family was actually racist. The women's movement wanted to minimize the role of fathers, so they joined. The Black Power movement did. And then the OEO offices, and then lawsuits were filed when there were restrictions, when women had to report to welfare offices to report the paternity of the fathers. Lawsuits were filed and said this was a violation of their privacy rights. So we removed the stigma. And so what happened between a short period of time of about 7 years, thousands and thousands of blacks flooded the welfare system, and what Clown and Piven and Ellerman predicted came true. As you could disconnect work from income, fathers became redundant, and then crime began to increase, a dropout rate. All of the social disorganization ended up having this detrimental effect. In fact, the largest increase in welfare in the city of New York occurred when the unemployment rate for black men was 4%. We actually had a labor force need, but yet people were flooding into the system. And predictably what happened was you saw the decline, and that's when young institutions began to decline. That's when pathology began to take hold. And you have the mess that you're in now. And so the question and the challenge, ladies and gentlemen, what should we do about it? What are the solutions? Well, people on the left assume that the problem with poverty is that we need more money, more social workers, when in fact 70% of all dollars going to the poor do not go to the poor. They go to those that serve poor people. They ask not which problems are solvable, but which ones are fundable this year. So you have created a commodity out of poor people, where a professional class of people are paid and their careers are contingent upon having large groups of people to serve. And it has powerful racial implications too, because only 2 out of 10 whites with college education works for government. 6 out of 10 blacks with college education works for government. So our middle class is anchored in government, and they are the caretakers of the poor. And so when you have this situation, a structural kind of disincentives for empowering poor people, the question is, what are the answers? Well, unfortunately, the left believes that we haven't spent enough, so we just need to continue on policies that have failed. And unfortunately, on the right, they have concluded that, well, since what we have done spending $22 trillion over 50 years hasn't worked, then what we ought to do is just cut those budgets and throw open the doors of the free enterprise system and let meritocracy determine winners and losers. There's an old African proverb that when the bull elephants fight, the grass always loses. And so therefore, it is important, ladies and gentlemen, as we talk about solutions, is to properly identify the problem. You cannot generalize about poor people. We must disaggregate it. There are 4 categories of poor people as on it. Category 1 are people just broke. Their character is intact. They use the welfare system as it was intended, as an ambulance service, not as a transportation system. They use it as a bridge over troubled times. They respond to opportunity. Category 2 are people whose character is intact, but they have made a strategic decision that the disincentives for working are too great, and they just opt out. Like the woman in Milwaukee, a mom raising a 5-year-old daughter on welfare and managed to save $5,000 of her welfare check to send her daughter to college, and she was charged with a felony and fined $5,000 plus court costs. So she concluded, well, I'll just stay on welfare. Category 3 are people who are disabled, and even in the disabled population, there are Appalachian whites who won't permit their 15-year-old to learn to read because the family will lose $680 in SSI payments. So we must do something to fix that. But the 4th category are the people who concerned us. These are the people who, of course, they are poor because they are morally and spiritually impoverished. And just giving program, they're drug addicts, they're living irresponsible life, they're predators. Just giving money and opportunity to that group injures them with the helping hand. It is category 4 that my organization specializes in reaching. The problem is people on the left tend to look at all poor people as if they're category 1, and people on the right tend to look at all poor people as if they're category 4. And therefore, we cannot have a reasonable discussion about remedies because we're talking about different populations. And so the challenge is, what is the solution for people in category 4? Well, what we have found is that, first of all, we must look to a different source of knowledge. And we must look at different experts. That's why I believe that the principles that operate in our market economy should operate in our social economy. In our market economy, only 3% of the people are entrepreneurs, but they generate 70% of all the new jobs. According to David Birch, entrepreneurs tend to be C students, not A students. A students come back to the university's dean and teach. C students come back and endow. Because in our market economy, the entrepreneur tends to be someone who's able to act in the presence of their own doubts and uncertainty and are willing to fail and bounce back and come back. But if you're very smart, you've got to have all the answers before you start, and by the time you act, the opportunity's gone. And so using that, but also we must look for a different source of knowledge. Most of the policy people in Washington look to professional experts. You look at who's having conferences on poverty. They're the Brookings Institute, Heritage, and the American Enterprise, all well-credentialed individuals who have been writing and studying the failures of poor people for about 40 years. And so new knowledge about how to solve problems will not come from academic studies. James C. Scott at Yale says that's episteme knowledge. Professional knowledge, what we should be seeking is metis knowledge, and that is common sense knowledge that is known and practiced by everyday people in those communities. He likens episteme knowledge, professional knowledge that you get from scholars. It's like a ship captain that's able to learn the skills to navigate a ship across a big ocean You can teach that. But when that ship gets to the port of Baltimore, this captain turns his ship over to a harbor master because that harbor master knows that harbor. Through common sense experience, and therefore that's how the ship. And so so the new source experts are not the scholars who are studying it. In fact, what distresses me so much is that a lot of conservative scholars are more like public policy medical examiners. All we're getting are autopsy reports where we talk about people, if you're born single mom, living in public housing, you dropped out of school, life is over for you. And they offer no prescriptions. You can never learn anything, ladies and gentlemen, from studying failure except how to fail. Therefore, I challenge my conservative colleagues to offer the American public a different vision that we propose. And that is, if you say that 70% of the people in these high-crime, drug-infested neighborhoods are raising children that are dysfunctional, it means that 30% are not. But you don't see any studies of the capacities of low-income people. So what we do at the Woodson Center is we go into low-income, high-crime, drug-infested neighborhoods, and we go to the 30% of the households to find out how people are able to raise children that are not dropping out of school, they're not in jail, they're not on drugs. And what is it that they are doing that distinguishes them from the 70%? So the grassroots leaders are the social entrepreneurs. They have come up with unique coping mechanisms that we use. And so what we do is we recruit among the 30% and act like we're a venture capitalist without money. And that is like in our market economy, we go and look for people who are having these kind of achievement against the odds, and we provide them with money, we provide them with assistance. A venture capitalist looks for an honest entrepreneur, and what they do is they try to take what's working in someone's garage and infuse capital, but also technical support, because the venture capitalists know too much money can suffocate an event, too much can starve it to death. And so the challenge is, how do you take what's working for 25 kids in the high crime neighborhoods that are managing to get out and achieve? How do we look at them as a social entrepreneur? How do we look at them as the experts, the anti-poverty experts? How do we insinuate money and training so that they can grow along a continuum? So they're helping 50 kids today. Next year, they're helping 500 kids. And then a year after that, they're helping 5,000. We've seen examples of that with Kimmy Gray, a woman in Washington, D.C. in the 70s, abandoned by her husband at age 22 with 5 children and on welfare. She gets off welfare in 3 years and sends all 5 kids to college. And when her neighbors said, "How do you do that?" she starts to open her house to teach. And when the first 4 kids come back, they're ashamed of their neighborhood, so she organizes the residents into a resident management corporation, takes charge, drives the drug dealers out, starts to teach children, and she has developed enterprises on her own. In 10 years, they sent 680 kids on to college, eliminating teen pregnancy in her community. Bertha Kilkey at Cochrane did the same thing. They were on, if you go on YouTube, Bertha Kilkey 60 Minutes, you can see Morley Safer spent 23 minutes right up the street from Pruitt-Igoe that was destroyed. Bertha Kilkey came in, organized her residents to take control of their environment, introduced discipline, all of the virtues of our founders found expression in these two islands of excellence. I worked for 4 months with Suzanne St. Pierre, who was a producer of 60 Minutes. And they did their due diligence to make sure that when they put that on air, they were doing what they said they did. You saw market rate housing built right across from what was once the most dangerous public housing in the country. And yet, with this experience, with this proof, Jack Kemp was the only Republican conservative to take any interest in this. And through Jack Kemp's leadership, we led the Republican Study Committee with Newt Gingrich and Vin Weber. They were all freshmen. Republicans did something that they didn't do before. They held hearings in public housing, not to ask about pathology, but to have the people explain how they achieved against the odds. When the Democrats found out about it, because it was on the front page news, anytime Republicans show interest in poor people, it's front page news. And then they had to rush and have hearings to do what the Republicans did. Jack Kemp said to me, Bob, these are 7 amendments that the resident said we need to get government off our back, because if we increase our income and reduce our cost, the money gets recaptured by the federal government. If we have a contractor that doesn't pick up the dumpsters on Friday night and rats take over, but once we took control, we fired that contractor and hired another private contractor on the condition that they hire 15 residents, and they want a Georgetown service. And that is, they want 3 pickups a week. And the whole, once you give the power and control to the people suffering the problem, then they transform that whole community there and around the country. So they have created islands of excellence. We also have it, ladies and gentlemen, my final problem that I think is a solution. The foster care system has about 500,000 kids every year. 70% of all people who are in prisons have spent time in the foster care system. It's the largest contributor to human trafficking in the country. And yet, if you were to go to a Republican-controlled state, the system is as bad as it is when it's run by the Democrats. And so what we have done in looking for solutions is that we've gone to Pastor Buster Soares' First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens in Somerset, New Jersey. When Chrissy Todd Whitman, the governor, said, we got 53 babies that are border babies where drug-addicted mothers have left and abandoned them in the hospitals. Buster came in with his church and set up a foster care system, placed all of those babies with members of the church. Every one of them have been adopted. He then set up and trained 350 families to become licensed foster homes. They placed 1,400 children in foster homes and adopted 300, taking them out of the system. Pastor Soares has the model. What needs to happen is that the conservative movement needs to declare a war on foster care system and enable Pastor Soares to recruit 400 churches all over this country, and we can find homes for all of these babies. This should be an example of what the conservative movement does to address the problems of poverty in America, and that is to join in common community with grassroots leaders that have demonstrated over the years they've got solutions. But what they lack is recognition, they lack money. Let me just end by reading something to you from a young man, Brandon Logan. He's with the Director Center for Families at the Texas Public Policy Institute. He said that if conservatives are to help restore America's inner cities, they must be willing to go where they have never gone and listen to people they have never met, to learn from those who have proven that they can make a difference in the lives of the poor. They must identify, recognize, and support these agents of individual and community uplift and provide resources, expertise, funding that can strengthen and expand their transformative work. If conservative principles are to prevail, it won't be by offering superior arguments, but by demonstrating that they can produce better people. And I think we won't be by offering superior arguments. There are two people who I think demonstrate effectiveness. One is Joe Louis, the other is Jesus. When Joe Louis fought at a time when his opponents were racist, the fans were racist who came to see him, all the odds were stacked against him. Joe Louis said, when you are faced with these overwhelming odds against you, knock the sucker out. Put him down. Jesus confronted the same doubters when the servants of John the Baptist came to him and said, are you the one that shall be seeked another? Jesus didn't respond with a white paper or reciting his resume. What the Savior did was heal in their presence and say, go tell him what you saw. So Joe Louis made his point by laying people down, and Jesus made his by raising people up. But both relied upon evidence to make their point. If we as conservatives want people to believe that our way of life, our view, our principles, our strategies are worth supporting, then we must demonstrate it to them so they can witness it for us, for themselves, and not just engage in opposition for what the other side has done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. And now we'll actually transition to question and answer time.
How do we rally the pastors?
Pastor Soares, how do we rally the pastors? The question was, I really think that Pastor Soares is a very well-known and celebrated theologian and pastor. And he's one of the few that gets invited to all of the Baptist denominations. And he was also featured for 2 hours on CNN. And so it's people like Pastor Soares and others that we just need to give him the resources he needs, and then we need to market him. I'm sure we have people with marketing skills, people who can open doors. We just got to come together and get behind people like that and market this and show the evidence that will work.
One of the things that we like to highlight, Bob, is this is Frederick Douglass Week and the Frederick Douglass Foundation and the Douglass Leadership Institute. And there's a great quote from Frederick Douglass that I like to refer to, and I'm going to read it in a moment, to springboard to an important question. But Douglass said it like this. He says that it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I think about some of the things that you've mentioned, people like Dr. Pat Fagan, others like Dr. Wilcox have written not only having a father in the home, but taking it one step further of having frequent church attendance increases all of the outcomes that you talk about, whether it's higher educational rates, less dropout, ultimately more income. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the church and maybe give some examples of how that institution in the past has served us well as it relates to reducing some of the pathologies that you've mentioned?
Well, the church certainly was central, starting with Mother Bethel back in 1700. The church used to operate its own welfare system by taxing each member a shilling a week. But it's very interesting, if you go back and look at the standards, there were moral standards for aid, that you couldn't get help if you were poor because of your own slothfulness, you were drunk, whatnot. So the church always had standards that they required people to meet, but also churches like Reverend Floyd, Pastor Soros' church in Somerset, New Jersey, decided to rebuild in the community, low-income, high-crime community, and then use the church's assets as an anchor, and over the last 20 years has just revitalized the entire community. Public housing looks like middle-class housing, and there are businesses moving in. They closed a strip club across the street. And so the church has been an instrument of not only moral and spiritual renewal, but also they've used their assets to rebuild those communities. He set up a community development corporation, and we hope to incentivize churches all over to open what we call community academies, so that kids can come in from 3 o'clock until 8 and receive a meal and also receive nurturance. So we hope to initiate these kind of small academies to provide an alternative to supplement what the moms are struggling to provide.
It's excellent. Now, I think that we have some questions in our immediate audience as well as maybe some questions online. And so let's see. I have a question in the back. If we could go. Yes, sir.
Okay. Just thinking about the idea of conservatives and caring for the poor, do you feel like most conservatives, especially considering fiscal conservatives, actually do care for the poor? And if not, how do we get them to care for the poor, especially urban inner city poor?
Well, I think, again, we need to stop. I think we spend too much time listening to the wrong experts. We really do. I mean, listening to scholars who have studied the poor year after year and never talked to any poor people. We need to do that. What we should do is be looking for capacity. In other words, you have a mom, when you read about a mother who was homeless and has 2 daughters throughout the 3 years of high school, living in homeless shelters and in her car, and the girls are studying by the light of a cell phone, and they graduate with honors and start college as a sophomore because they've taken so many advanced placement courses. They ought to be the heroes. They ought to come into our banquets. We need to find out, how did they do that? So we need to have different symbols of success. We should always be on the lookout for people who are achieving against the odds. We must get to know them as friends. We must do outreach to help them. We must let people know we're looking for them, instead of just always going to conferences and inviting pathologists to come and tell us how bad off people are.
Excellent. A couple of other questions. Arena.
Irina Grosu, I'm the director of the Center for Human Dignity here. My question is, what do you think should happen to the welfare system, and how do we maximize the use of it effectively?
I think we must do more than just require work. I think we must do more than drug tests for food stamps. I mean, the only time we hear about conservatives, it's always on the downside. What can we do? We must understand that welfare should be associated with transformation. And so there are organizations, there's Pastor Jubal in San Antonio that has one of the most effective drug programs. Now, the people who are on welfare, their food stamps goes to the ministry. And the ministry, in turn, feeds the people. And there's an example of how they transition. And I'm for having requirements for welfare. I'm not soft on that. But expectations in the absence of opportunity is really oppression. It's not enough to expect someone to do something. You must provide them with the means for them to meet the expectation. And I think part of welfare reform has to be incentivizing some of the people in these communities that have demonstrated they can generate redemption and transformation in people. They should be a part of the welfare system too, but the goal is to get people off welfare and not have them. 2 years and you're off came from 50 representatives from the community. Many of them were on welfare themselves. They were the ones who said, we need 2 years and you're off.
As a follow-up question, and we have one coming, but let me ask you this, Bob. Who are the people that we need to look out for? Like, who are the people, when I say look out for, who are those within our communities or those who are on the Hill who essentially have no real interest in people getting better? Some of them are local people, some of them are people that are up here, but who, I mean, quite honestly, some of them are now pastors. You know, I mean, there are some people who are not interested in the problem being addressed. Give us a picture, whether it's from the local level or in the halls of Congress. Who are the people that we need to watch out for? And if you're talking to other leaders out there, who should they be watching out for?
Well, first of all, it's finding credible people in communities. I remember the Bradley Foundation in Milwaukee back in '94 said, Bob, the kind of people you're talking about don't exist in our community, so therefore our consultants told they're not there. And so I came there without knowing anybody on the ground, and I went to barbershops and hairdressers, and I just asked people, where do you turn to in times of crisis and in trouble? Well, the same names kept coming up. Well, I knocked on their doors, and I met 3 people, and from them I met 30, and from there I met 60. Today, the Bradley Foundation has $5 million that invest in those organizations. We introduced them to well into the future. And so I think that is certainly one level. But think about this. Americans are thirsty to support virtuous behavior. When you have a homeless man in Boston, Massachusetts some years ago who found a knapsack with $46,000, he turned it into the police. Somebody put a GoFundMe up. They got $93,000 in 2 days. And that happened 4 times over the course of a year. Americans, Dean, are thirsty to see and support virtue, but we must, as an organization, try to find people who are in poverty but not of it, and then publicize the expression of virtue, and then find out from those people who acted in that situation what motivated them to turn that money in. And then learn from them how to connect better with people in their circumstance. In other words, we really need to build bridges into these communities. Churches should go look for these. We should always be on the lookout for virtue in action among people like that.
That's excellent. We have a question from Reverend Cardwell from Richmond, Virginia. Yes, sir.
Actually, it's not so much a question. I'm a pastor, and I hear these questions raised about pastors all the time. One of the things that I've discovered is that despite what people might popularly think, most pastors who are trained are not trained for community engagement. At best, they're trained for evangelism, and there's a far difference between community engagement and evangelism. And so if the desire is for the faith community to become involved, what needs to happen is to search out pastors and resource them, not necessarily so much with money all the time, but with the capacity and the capability to be able to do community engagement. That's training.
Very good. A couple of other questions. I see a hand back here.
My name is Sandy. I work with traditional values. I've helped run the Welfare to Work program in Orange County, California. There's 2 clocks that people are on, 48-month clocks. And once the first 48-month clock runs out, then you start a second 48-month clock. It's kind of frustrating. Meanwhile, folks will continue to have children and whatnot and just stay on the clock. And so to find any measure of success, we had to get involved ourselves in economic development. And so I'd like to ask you, how much do you suggest we become knowledgeable in econ development to help bridge that gap?
Very much so. What we do is that we promote, like Kurt Moore, who spent 13 years in federal prison in Indianapolis, came out. Pastor Darrell Webster has what he called a boot camp, where he gets 200 people like that who meet 5:30 to 7, 20 straight days. You got to be intentional when you get up that early. Kurt Moore said, I needed to work. He was put to work washing cars in the garage for 4 months until the owner of the garage gave him a beat-up truck and a power washer, and Kurt started washing cars in people's driveway. And now he has 22 employees, contracts with 10 car dealerships, and he still lives in that high crime zip code, and he's providing jobs, temporary first-time jobs for people coming out of prison and in communities. So when you get a Kurt Moore, and what we did was connecting with a business person because he was paying 20% interest on loan for his equipment. So you providing assistance to him, but you really look, and there are other entrepreneurs like that can be not only a person supplying jobs, but also inspiring people to transform their lives as well. So there are hundreds of people like Kurt Moore's around. What we need to do is go out and look for them, and once we find them, resource them. But also they need more than money. They need guidance. They need support. And this is where we call them enterprise partners. The person who is a successful businessman or woman is able to partner with the Kurt Moores in the rebuilding of not only his business, but the rebuilding of that community. These are the kind of informal relationships we need to encourage.
Bob, last year, the Douglas Leadership Institute, along with the Family Research Council, did about 30 events, mostly in black church communities, focusing on economic opportunity, strengthening the black family. And out of that, we engaged with people within the community, and we did nonpartisan voter guides and distributed about 1.5 million, but we used the people in the community to help do that. How important is the political process? Because sometimes people make it seem like that's all that there is, and then sometimes we're not engaged enough. But give us a perspective from the local, state, and federal level. How important is it for us to activate grassroots folks to be engaged in that process?
I think, but they've got to be, it is important, but they've got to see the correlation between putting energy into getting someone elected and helping someone. And I think it should happen the other way, like Dick Riordan, who's the first Republican to get elected mayor of Los Angeles back in 1990, because Dick Riordan came in and invested charitably, and then he harvested politically.
Excellent. Say that again.
That Dick Riordan came in to the east side of Los Angeles, a low-income Hispanic neighborhood. He connected with Jenny Lichtenberg, who was a nun, Democratic-leaning nun, but he helped and recruited his friends and built a state-of-the-art center where there were just trailers. And then 2 years later, he declared for the mayor, and he won. And when he got reelected, he won by 60% of all demographics. It proves that when you invest charitably, you can harvest politically, but you don't plant and harvest in the same year. And it's important for particularly the black community to be politically competitive.
That's right.
So it is most important to be political. But also part of what we ought to be doing is everybody should go see the movie Hidden Figures. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen it, ladies and gentlemen, see it. I'm raising money to send hundreds of black kids in our violence-free zone schools. We're gonna rent the whole movie theater.
That's excellent.
Because you see 3 black women in the 60s who are mathematicians and engineers triumphed over racism and resistance both as blacks and as women, but they proved that performance, if the best antidote to disrespect is not protest, it's performance. And that movie embodies that principle. I'm going to repeat that, the best defense against disrespect is not protest, it's performance. That's what Joe Louis and Jesus did. They performed. Yes.
I just wanted to know, why is it so hard to get this message out into the urban community? I guess I should stop right there.
It's really hard because we have been intimidated by race. Race pervades everything today. If you want to silence somebody, there are two things that I wasn't going to say this, but I am. I'm at the point in my life where I don't care. I love getting old. I love getting old because I don't care. The two things we got to get rid of: white guilt and black exemption, where blacks can dismiss anything that we do and we can blame it on white folks. And I'm telling black American, you need a 2-year moratorium complaining about white folks. And we need to deal with the enemy within. And so that's what we need, some honest dialogue. Americans are ready to hear honest talk. But the left has just intimidated everybody. They use race as a spear against other blacks who would challenge orthodoxy, and a shield against any personal responsibility. They can do whatever they want. Ray Nagin can steal money while blacks are drowning in Ward 9, but they're going to blast Jeff Sessions for something he may have said 30 years ago. I don't see no outrage about Ray Nagin and Bill Jefferson, who's stuffing his freezer with money when people are drowning, and 9 members of his family who work for state and city government have been indicted for taking money that was supposed to go to help black teenagers who are pregnant, $500,000, and they use it on themselves. But yet you don't even know about that, because race exempts us from addressing the evil that is within.
I think we have time for one quick question last.
Just statement, and he can have his question. We have to have a strategy in the African American community to address Democrats who their first response always is, "You've been bought off." The message never gets out into the community because the message always is that the persons who are delivering the message have already been bought. So we never get a chance to hear the message clearly without sound blasts being all over the room that your voice should be negated.
Well, let me just say that when I stand before a group surrounded by 30 ex-gang members whose lives have been liberated from predatory violence, no one accuses me of being an Uncle Tom. And I think that when we surround ourselves with people that provide evidence for our principles, let them speak for what you. I'm not a solo act. I use my experience and my relationship. We have 2,500 grassroots leaders in 39 states who look to us for leadership, and that's our reference group. And so when I speak, I'm speaking for them as well as myself. So I'm not alone in these views. And when people know that, they kind of give you a pass. So I would suggest to you that one of the ways that you can confront your opposition is just surround yourself with evidence of what you believe. And let them ask somebody who was on drugs for 10 years but now has been free whether or not your actions are helpful or not.
Well, we're going to get ready to bring this to a close. Before we applaud Bob, I want to say that this actually will be available at FRC and the Douglas Leadership Institute's website so that we can bypass some of those who might not want this message to get out. In addition, we also will be hosting events in different states over the next several months along these same lines. So I want to thank all of you who have joined us today. I want to thank all of those who have joined us by Facebook and live stream. This is an extremely important topic, and we ask that all of you would stay in contact with us for future events. God bless you.